Welcome back to Nick Lenz Comic Corner Classic New Classic. This is episode number 1487 and Doubleshot number 1381. Now, this one particularly, now, you probably have seen these books when I discuss about this series in my comic book history video. But I'm talking about the books themselves. We have Essential Spider-Man, volumes 1 and 2. Yes. These two books here collect the first 32 issues of this 129 issue series, along with the first three annuals, Amazing Spider-Man 268, 293, 294, and Peter Parker Does Protect with Spider-Man 131, 132. And, oh boy, there is a lot of writers on these books. Like, a lot. Like, you have... Like to start with, for the first three issues is Louise Simonson. And then you have Danny Figueroa for issues 4 through 6. Tom DeFalco does Amazing Spider-Man. Peter David does issue 7. He doesn't come back until issue... He does Peter issue 7, 7, 12, 13. And this is just in this book here. And a lot of the other time, and the Danny Figueroa does come back for issues 10, 11... And that's it. A lot of the rest of the issues in here are done by Dave Michelini. Yep. And as for the Anne Whip of Spider-Man, the two we published in here are done by Ann Nocenti. Yes, Ann Nocenti. Now, I should point out that the two of the people who work on this book would actually later found Image. The issue 18, the artwork is done by Mark Silvestri. By thinking, that name sounds so familiar. Didn't he have found Image? Yes, he did. And the second annual of Spider-Man is done by one of the people who were probably associated with Dark Horse Comics, Mike Managlia. Yep. And aside from those two, a lot of these ones basically people may have heard of, like Greg LaRocque, Jim Mooney, Mike Zeck, Bob Layton, Dave Simmons, Ron Furtz, Geoff Isherwood. You may have heard of this guy. Issue 11, basically, you should mention that's co-written by Bill Mantlo. Yes. And artwork by Bob McLean. Sal Buscema does some artwork in here. Mike Harris. Now, in the case of what happens in these issues, in the case of this one here, the first three issues is basically a storyline featuring the Vulturanians. Yes, a group of four guys who dress up as the Vulture, to beat the crap out of Spider-Man and impress the Kingpin of Crime. Yep. Also, issue 1 is a very notorious issue because there's actually a brief scene in here that people have actually seen outside the comics. It was actually also featured in one episode of the animated series for Spider-Man back in the 90s and in Spider-Man 3. What scene is it? Now, at this point in time, Spider-Man was actually wearing the red and black suit. He went back to that after he stopped wearing the symbiote suit. And then it went back to him, and then he fought the Vulturanians in the opening issue. And he goes to a church. You were thinking, a church? You were thinking, wait, is there going to be ringing bells, and the symbiote comes off him, it falls off him? Yes, that's what happens in here. That's mostly like him going to church and ringing bells, and they get the symbiote off him. That actually has happened, like I said before, I think it was the Alien Costume Part 1 from Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man the Animated Series. I believe it was episode 7, if I'm not mistaken, happening. And plus it happened infamously in Spider-Man 3. The difference is that part did happen, except what happened next, basically, because basically Neil killed Peter, get the symbiote off him. The symbiote itself basically just pulled him aside, and then sort of evaporated. It was later retconned that symbiote was Eddie Brock afterwards. Yep. And of course, also, like, the Vulturanians also had a chance to have a fight with the frickin' Vulture, because everybody fights the Vulture. Yep. And, well, that's kind of what happened in the opening 3 issues of the series. Plus, you gotta love the cover artwork in here. Fantastic artist here. Now, issue 4 through 6 is basically a 3-parter featuring, well, 4 and 5 is a 2-parter featuring Turner Dr. Octopus. Yep. 6 is a crossover with Amazing Spider-Man as part of the Secret Wars 2 tie-in. Now, they had this whole thing of like about a building turned to gold. And you're probably thinking, what building turned to gold? Well, this was explained in the issue of Secret Wars. With Beyonder, get this, turned the main headquarters of the Heroes for Hire, which at the time was just Luke Cage and Iron Fist, this is back in the 80s, they turned their own headquarters into a golden building. And there's a plot there about Golden Notebook that basically transitions here. Kingpin wants to get his hand on a golden typewriter to get rich. Yeah, it wasn't the Beyonder Day. It was really weird. Yeah. Also, I should point out, though, sometimes basically you see Peter wearing this costume here. A lot of time in these Web Star miniatures, he generally is wearing a black costume. Basically a regular black costume. Oh, and they do mention frequently for the first few issues that this series takes place just after the events of Peter Parker does Protect Us Spider-Man issue 100 when Black Cat broke up with Spider-Man. Yep. That was a recurring plot there for quite some time. Yep. And after the Secret Wars 2 tie-in. Yeah, after the tie-in for Secret Wars wrapped up, and then you have issue 7 where you have an encounter with the Hulk. Yes, the Hulk. Issue 8, which is basically the cover artwork here. Eight is just a regular standalone, like, it was some kid or whatever. And, well, actually, it deals with a guy called the Smithville Thunderbolt. Yeah, it's this old school superhero who exists just for this, like, two-parter. And that's it. Yeah. It exists for issues 8 and 9. Now, the annual is just simply Spider-Man fights face off against an Iron Man ripoff. Yep. That's simply what the first annual is. Basically, a guy who's got a power set to, well, you can also think of this guy as a ironmonger type person. 10 is a guest star appearance by Dominic Fortune. And you probably ask Nick, who the heck is Dominic Fortune? He's a mercenary who basically existed. He also has his own steamboat. Yep. Which, by the way, he got the steamboat from an old girlfriend of his, basically, who he actually was still seeing as of recently. He actually had a kid who died. Yep. I mean, he's been active since, like, the 40s. Yeah, also had him fight the frickin' Shocker for this issue. And he briefly have Spider-Man back in the red and black. This back from the cover, he's in the black costume, but in the interior, he's wearing the red costume. A lot of issues, especially in this book here, like a lot of standalone issues, really have nothing really much to do with like Spider-Man. So it's basically him like saving kids. Just basically small scale stuff for a lot of this series. I mean, is anything really historic happening aside from maybe the Volturians? Well, yes, there actually is a debut of another character pops up in here. This whole thing with Spider-Man and Jameson. 14 has him fighting Crossfire. Anybody thinking, Crossfire? He's another guy you probably would say, who the heck is Crossfire? He's Darian Cross's cousin, and he's an enemy of Hawkeye. He's this guy who's got this, like, target on his face. Also, here's the Black Fox. He's an old... I think he's a minor villain for Spider-Man. And you have the debut of a brand new character. This is Chance. He is not that known of a Spider-Man villain. I don't have a problem with him, unlike the Looter. I can't stand the Looter. This guy I have no problem with. He's simply a mercenary, usually is hired to kill Spider-Man a lot of the time. Usually failing. But that's his debut. Issue 15 is his debut. He does occasionally appear in Spider-Man. He's made occasional appearances over the years. Not a lot. Yep. 16 is just a horror issue. And then we have debut of a new character, Magma. I think he disappears for these 2 issues. I think that's it. Yeah, and then you have, see in the corner here, whole thing of missing in action. Yeah, because Spider-Man had to temporarily retire because of injuries. 18 is quite unique, because this actually was reprinted for the Birth of Venom, because it was in this issue that we kind of had a debut Eddie Brock here in this issue, where at one point in the issue, Peter Parker was shoved onto a train track. Because here it is, basically right here. This hand here, that was later retconned to being Eddie Brock. And this is kind of considered to be his debut. He gets pushed off the train tracks in order to attempt to kill him. Yep. The second annual, it just basically team up with New Mutants. Yep. And this is done by Arthur Adams. Who does the opening story in here? I know that Mike Manali's in here. I think it would be. Yep. Well, that's the first book for you when it comes to Web of Spider-Man. The second volume, this one is a bit different. Now, here's something interesting though. 21 is quite unique. Why? Because it's written and drawn by Larry Lieber. And you're probably asking, Nick, who is Larry Lieber? He's Stan Lee's brother. Yep. That's who he is. Now, of course, a lot of the issues in here are still done by Jim Michelini, Jim Shooter, obviously. Len Kamensky does some co-writing too. 22 is also done by Larry Lieber as well. Now, in the case of these other writers, you're probably like, who? You have Stefan Petrard, don't know who this guy is. Dwight Zimmerman, Bob Layton, yep, people know who this guy is. And late Steve Gerber. And of course, you have Jim Owsley. If you look this guy up, it's Christopher Priest. Yep, he actually did a couple issues for the series. And then, of course, 3132, obviously, is Jan Lamadius, obviously. Now, in the case of, that's basically 3132 of this series, along with Amazing Spider-Man 293, 294, Peter Parker with Echo 131, 132. This is the Kraven's Last Hunt storyline, where it's done by Jane Lamadius, art by Mike Zeck. And number 3 is basically Danny Figueroa and Roger Stern. Artwork is by these people: Alex Savuk, Frank Gatita, Don Perlin, Steve Giger, Michael Nesser, Jim Mooney, Greg LaRuck, Peter Popsy, Al Gordon, and Bob Layton. Wow, that's a lot of people. Yep, to start off with, 19 is the introduction to 2 people: Solo and Humbug. He's another guy who I say, who? Well, if you ever read the Heroes for Hire book that was published from 2006 to 2007, he was one of the characters of the book, and he died. He got eaten by bugs during the World War Hulk invasion. Yep, that's basically like what this guy is. He's an offbeat villain. And he sporadically appears. I mean, when he gets this book, it seems like he has a lot more interesting stories here. Like, once you get past the first 18 issues, like, you have some okay stories here and there, and then you get a lot more interesting stuff. Like a little more spy stuff. Not much Mary Jane Watson. Some early issues did feature her of this series, but then they dropped her and featured somebody else in here as a Peter's potential love interest. And you have 21, which is basically Spider-Man versus Spider-Man, which has turned out to be some guy posing as him in order to basically draw some money. That's simply what this guy is. 22, it's just basically Peter and Joy. That's someone who works for the Daily Bugle. Yeah, they're just investigating this site, which apparently is owned by frickin' Raxon, which, yeah, you know, typically Raxon executives written be nothing more than the biggest jerks in Marvel Comics. Yeah, they're going to be a stereotypical evil businessman, because I'm sure that people at Marvel don't like some big corporations. And you have Slider, yes. He's kind of an evil speedster in a way, but his basically is tech based. Doesn't have actual speed powers like Quicksilver or North Star. Yeah, he's Slider is also a thief. That's simply what he is. And in the end of the issue, we tease the return of the Vulture. Yep. And of course, also we tease also Vulture fighting frickin' Hobgoblin. Yes, Hobgoblin. Who, by the way, they actually later retconned in the 90s to being Roger Kingsley the Mask, like a lot of the time. Either it's him or Jason McIndale. There was a lot of imposters. There's also the Rose. Yep, the Rose. And you have this Stalker from the stars, this alien Spider-Man battles for an issue. Yep. Really cool issue, this one. And then, like, all of a sudden, like, it's like the last issue, he was wearing the Black Hawk. Here he's switched back to red and black for the red and blue for some reason. Yeah, there's no real explanation for this at all. This is about one Spider-Man's villains? No, just some one-shot characters. Involved in the standalone issue. And then we have Web of Spider-Man 27, which is another standalone issue. Yep. Which just involves some salesman basically changes stripes. 28 is, well, Spider-Man injured by some other goons who are basically like one-shot characters. '29 is a really cool one. Yep. Side by side with Wolverine. This, of course, is just after the events of Spider-Man vs. Wolverine one-shot, which is not printed in here. If you're curious what happened in the issue, basically, Spider-Man meets Wolverine for the first time, and of course, Wolverine finds out that, well, Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And so they're in Germany. Of course, Peter's on assignment in Germany with Ned Lads. And of course, Ned Lads was kind of figured out to be the frickin' Hobgoblin. Of course, some people thought for a while he was Hobgoblin. Until he got into a fight with a group of guys who work for a guy called the Foreigner, who is the ex-husband of Silver Sable. And the Foreigner's men murdered Ned Lads. Well, he was dead. And he stayed dead for a long time. Well, that wasn't until Dan Slott resurrected him in Clone Conspiracy. That came out, how long ago this book came out? Like roughly about 5 years ago. And now currently Betty Brant's pregnant. Yeah, this just is with the aftermath of Ned Lads. This is a really good issue. Just basically Wolverine gets off an issue. And also meet a guy called the Arranger. Now, if you don't know who this guy is somebody who works for the Kingpin, and he arranges stuff for the Kingpin. He's kind of in the way the Kingpin's underboss. That's simply what the guy is. And of course, I have to deal with, well, Wolverine and, well, Hobgoblin. And then we have True Confession. Ooh. And we finally figure out who was under the mask. It's Richard Fisk. Yep. Yeah, pretty much we get the origin of the Rose, which at the end of the issue, with, of course, well, so posing as Hobgoblin gets arrested, and then a shocking thing happens. Richard Fisk agrees to work for his father, and it happens at the end of issue 30. Now, a lot of the rest of this book is Craven the Last Hunt. I've covered this one already. It's a really good crossover. I highly recommend checking out. As for the third annual, mind you, which by the way is the cover of the book, this one is basically a bunch of one-shot stories. We're also exploring a lot of Peter's gadgets. Today's like an important annual. It's a bunch of one-page stories. Just deal with various aspects of Peter's life. That's simply what the annual is. It's a pretty good annual, good advertising for Spider-Man comics. But that's simply all it is. I'm going to give basically Essential Spider-Man Volumes 1 and 2 a 9 out of 10. And here's a shocker for you. These two are the only ones that are published. Yeah, Marvel never did another one because here's the thing. Marvel ended the Essential line roughly back, I think they started back in 1999 and looked up online, and they actually ended it, I think it was a year before DC ended the Showcase Presents run. They actually ended theirs in 2014. DC ended Showcase Presents in 2015. Not really sure why. Especially this, like, okay, you put out 2 volumes and that's it. That's all you're going to do. Excuse me. If you're curious to what happened next after Craven's Last Summer in Case Web of Spider-Man, it became part of a crossover known as Life of the Mad Dog Ward. Yes, that is seriously what came next. And a bunch of other stories. Like, oh my gosh, there was like a ton of other stories. Now, I've already covered, in a way, when it comes to Web of Spider-Man. I have covered the last, how should I put it? Pretty much the last 13 issues of the original run, thanks to the Clone Conspiracy stuff. Yeah, I've already covered that stuff already. So since I've covered the first, 33 issues, because I've covered Life Mad Dog Ward. Now, I think Web of Spider-Man is definitely a good series. I do recommend checking it out. It's just that the problem is there isn't a lot of trades that collect Web of Spider-Man. And I kind of wish they would give this one a little more light. And here's the thing about this book. This book was launched as a replacement for Marvel Team Up. And it didn't last very long. It lasted for a little over 10 years. It lasted for, just a little over 10 years this book was published. They ended it and replaced it with, what was replaced for this series? Was it Peter Parker Spider-Man? No, it was actually Sensational Spider-Man. Yeah, that was the replacement for this one, was Sensational Spider-Man. A book that didn't last very long. Nope, that book lasted for 33 issues before it finally ended. Yep, 33. This book lasted for 129 issues and published 10 annuals. Yes, some of the series isn't trade, but not a lot of it per se. It doesn't get a lot of love, like, let's say, like Amazing does, and Spider-Man gets a good amount of love. Web, not really. No, it's a good series, but I think the reason why the Marvel was never fully brought back as an ongoing series, they kind of did in, like, I think it was like 22. I think it was 2009. They brought it back. Yeah, they brought it back just to be later on be a sort of a book that ties in with the Gauntlet storyline. I think officially was brought back in 2010, and of course get involved with the Grim Hunt the Gauntlet / Grim Hunt stuff, where it involves basically exploring backstories for a lot of the classic Spider-Man villains. But as for like a proper ongoing series, not like an anthology book like the second volume was, you probably don't see that anymore. I mean, it's a book that nobody talks about. I mean, what Amazing Spider-Man gets a lot of love, like I said. People talk about Second Special was brought back. Oh, I think it was like 2016 was brought back. It was 2017 was brought back. Wasn't around very long. No, it lasted for a good couple of years before Marvel decided to end it at issue 313 because it was renumbered to issue 300 rather than issue 6. This book overall, if you count the second volume, like that is roughly like 141 issues. Yes, by far. Well, it is a pretty lengthy series. It was also at the time the 4th Spider-Man book to hit 400. They hit 100. Of course, first was Amazing Spider-Man, and then it was Marvel Team Up, then Peter Parker Second Spider-Man, which actually just came out right after that one, and this one was the 4th one. If you think, is there any more to hit 100? There's actually 2 more, believe it or not. There was Peter Parker Spider-Man, which actually 100 was technically the second issue of the second volume, and Ultimate Spider-Man. And you might ask, Nick, is there any other Spider-Man comic to ever hit 100 after that? Well, actually, no. There has been. The last one was Ultimate Spider-Man. I could say Spider-Woman, but the numbering for that one was quite strange. They never properly explained. Of course, one guy had to go online and make a calculation about these books basically being counted part of the numbering for Spider-Woman, but that was mostly 100 issues for Jessica Drew. But for Spider-Man itself, no. Like, this was the last. This was the 4th one. And, of course, they put out 2 more, and that was it. Yep, so yeah, that's it for particular review. Next one's going to be another Comic Corner discussing Iron Man. Okay, next video. Bye.